Hi everyone, my name is Kristen Lagan and welcome to my case study presentation on my website redesign for Cherokee County. So I want to talk about the contents that are going to be going throughout during this presentation. I'm going to give an overview of the challenge, the solution, and the impacts of this project, as well as going through the design process, starting with empathizing with my users, being able to define and iterate problems, insights, and different solutions, how prototyping went, how the testing, usability testing went, as well as the outcomes and the lessons that I have taken from this project. So starting out with the overview of why even redesign the Cherokee County website in the first place, I noticed going through the initial kind of investigation of the site, there were a lot of accessibility concerns, a lot of difficulties with navigating the site, as well as just the minimal responsive design that the site is currently has. And you'll see when I talk about my annotations, you'll see kind of examples of what that looks like. Moving into the solutions, the goal really was to update and improve the UI to make it easier to navigate for users, making just like a more fresh, responsive web design, as well as updating the information architecture for the site. And then finally, the impacts here. I'm going to go into more detail about the impacts later on in this presentation, but I wanted to highlight the two variables that I tracked throughout usability testing and iteration of each prototype. And those two variables were success rate and duration. So at the very end, I found that on average, the users are 1.5 to 3 times more likely to successfully complete tasks 1 through 3. And then similarly to duration, quite the opposite. For duration, there was about a 1.5 to 2 minute duration reduction in the amount of time it took users to complete tasks 1 through 3. So with that, started with some annotations, just try to investigate the current site. As you can see here, there's a lot of annotations and notes that I did. I wanted to make sure that I had a thorough investigation of the homepage and some key sites. I noticed that there was a lot of issues associated with the primary versus the secondary menu categories. So you see here, there's a top navigation bar and then there's a left side navigation bar, but the secondary and the tertiary elements or the categories within those menus are different, which is really confusing for navigating. And then I also noted the heuristic concerns that I found, all associated with the different design elements that were used from page to page, the lack of the ability for the user to navigate back home, as well as the inability to search for items because there wasn't a search bar or a search function on some of the pages throughout the site. So with that, I wanted to start doing some usability testing on the current site. And within my usability plan, I had users complete 3 different tasks. One was to locate the public health department, give me some more information on that department. The second one was to identify 3 government offices. And then the final one was to download this particular PDF document. And so with that initial usability testing, I found a lot of pain points that needed to be addressed from my users, mainly associated with the inability to locate documents because of that search function. It wasn't working on some pages. Just the UI that currently makes up the site was impacting the overall experience that users were having trying to complete tasks. There was some confusion on the lack of the footer that currently doesn't exist on the site. Once again, some usability constraints, and then just the lack of transparency or the lack of one of my users were unable to contact like a help desk if they needed to ask a question from their government agency. So that was a pain point that someone had noted for me. And then you can see here this chart. It just goes into detail about that duration average as well as the success rate average that I wanted to track from start of this project to the very end. And you'll see some of those statistics throughout this presentation. So also throughout this presentation, I wanted to incorporate different quotes that I found really interesting throughout this process. One being I had a user tell me that the process of going through the tasks that I had them complete was a very cumbersome process, which was really something I wanted to touch on through iteration and usability testing and iteration again within the prototypes. But I wanted to make sure that I took a note of this. So through those usability testing and talking to users, talking to interviewees, I developed Norma Carrollton. She is my user persona. She's a 39-year-old eighth grade high school teacher, or eighth grade middle school teacher. She teaches history, and she really just needs a site that allows her to get information really quickly in a timely manner, but it's also user friendly because she wants to be able to integrate this website into her instructional time when she's teaching students about history. She's new to Cherokee County, so she wants to also be able to use this site to learn more about the county that she recently moved to. But just like my users had stated, many of the pain points that she experienced was the fact that it took so much effort and so many clicks to get to a small amount of information. The menu categories, primary, secondary, tertiary categories were really confusing for navigation. The inability to use the search bar or the search function period, as well as the lack of support or help. She couldn't really reach out to anyone because there wasn't like a clear number to contact someone from the government office. And then the site was just kind of cluttered with unorganized elements and a lot of jargon that made understanding the content really difficult for Norma. So with that, it was also important to investigate and identify Norma's behaviors, Norma's experiences, and her feelings associated with navigating through the current Cherokee County website. And so you'll see here on this chart, I wanted to kind of gauge and try to identify what she's feeling from stage one, which is just learning about the site, to the very end of unfortunately leaving the site. And you'll see here her experience meter starts off pretty good in that green range, and over time she starts to try to use the site. She tries to use different functions within the site, and she eventually ends up in the red zone, which is not something we want to have our users experience is being in that poor experience meter area. But also with this, you'll see that there's many opportunities associated with changing the interface, updating it, allowing users to use the search function, and integrating other elements to better their experience through navigation. So with this too, I personally don't know much about government websites when I first started this project, so I knew I needed to start somewhere with investigating current sites that exist out there. So I used these 5 sites as inspiration when it came to the UI portion of this project. A lot of these sites provide a good example of how, or allowing users to come into the site, navigate, complete a task based on what they need to get out of the site in a very user-friendly manner. So I knew that I wanted to use these as inspiration for my redesign. And with that too, those 5 or 6 sites of inspiration also bled into the style guide that I developed for this redesign. I knew I wanted to keep a couple different elements from the original Cherokee site, such as the color palette, which is like kind of that red, white, and blue scheme that they had, as well as the top navigation portion and the side navigation portion to kind of help the user navigate through the site, letting them know where they are in the site, and that those are elements that I wanted to keep. But I also knew I needed to do more work with updating and improving the iconography and the topography of the site, as well as modernizing the site with updated search fields and updated forms that improve navigation. So I had to start somewhere with these sketches. So I did some desktop sketches as well as mobile sketches. And because of these sketches, I was able to kind of get a framework of how I wanted the UI to lay out. And that led to some initial testing. So you'll see here, I wanted to show that the ways in which data informed design. So from the initial site testing, I had found that I needed to condense the footer category, well, add a footer, and then condense those categories. I needed to make sure that I altered the navigation bar elements, and then I needed to add a context category. So that was the information that the insight that I received from initial testing, which led to me designing this low fidelity prototype. And from testing this particular prototype, I found that there were still some usability issues going on. But users were starting to like the fact that the side navigation bar, they could see where they were in the site based on that navigation. So that helped with that heuristic. And another quote from another interviewee that I had, like I said, they really wanted a way to contact someone like a help desk through the government office. And so that's why I made the decision to include a contact us primary category within the footer. So moving on to the mid-fidelity prototype, I originally learned from findings from the low fidelity prototype that I needed to still update some of the sitemap elements. I had an employee portal, but I didn't quite know where I wanted to put it, so I knew I needed to do something with that utility function. I knew I also really wanted to alphabetize navigation. I had another user tell me that it was easier to find elements if they were alphabetized for them. So I took that insight and tried to incorporate it into this redesign, this mid-fidelity prototype. And then I had a couple individuals say that they were missing a search icon on mobile. So that was something that I also wanted to integrate as we went through this process. And I did testing on this mid-fidelity prototype and found that I needed to add a forms category within the primary navigation. Right now, you'll see that there isn't a section that details forms, and that definitely the lack of that category impacted usability. So that last task of being able to locate and download that PDF document, the success rate was still pretty low, and the duration it took users to accomplish that task was still pretty high at this point of mid-fidelity prototype testing. So I knew that was something I needed to make sure that I adjusted during the high fidelity prototype. And once again, too, I noticed some issues with there's some color accessibility issues in the hover states that I needed to fix. And so with that information, I learned a little bit more about how the site didn't quite seem super approachable to a couple of my users, this user in particular. They offered the example or the idea of adding in pictures for my government officials. And so I took that and I ran with it, and I updated the prototype to the now high fidelity prototype. I made the changes that I kind of learned from the insight that I had received. And then I finally updated the primary navigation bar to add that forms category, as you see in this navigation portion, or this navigation bar, as well as I altered the hover states to make it more user-friendly and more accessible. And then another quote from another interviewee I had, they just said that they really liked how mobile and desktop shared a lot of similarities, and it made it easier for them to switch back and forth from device to device. And so finally, coming to the outcomes, at the start of this presentation, I talked about two key variables that I wanted to track throughout this whole process, one being success rates and the other one being duration. And so I decided to break up the outcomes into two separate portions, one slide being on desktop and the other one being on mobile. So this first one is the outcomes associated with the prototypes, the desktop prototypes. So you'll see for success rates, users were about 1.5 times more likely on average to successfully complete tasks 1 through 3. And you'll see that gradual increase in change over time from prototype to prototype. And then on the flip side, you'll see duration on desktop actually decreased. There was about a 2-minute reduction in the average duration taken to complete tasks 1 through 3, comparing initial website to the final high fidelity prototype. And moving on to mobile, you'll kind of see this similar effect when it comes to success rates and duration as well that we saw on desktop. Users were about 3 times more likely on average to successfully complete tasks 1 through 3. And you'll see that trend over time from prototype to prototype. And then duration, you'll see a roughly 1.5 minute reduction in the average time it took users to complete tasks 1 through 3 over time. And so finally, coming to the lessons that I can take away from this project, like I said before in the previous slide, duration and success rates definitely changed as iterations evolved. It would have been nice to receive Cherokee County stakeholder input. I wasn't able to actually get in contact with anyone to help kind of fortify the design decisions that I was making, so it would have been nice to get their input. And then finally, it's important to note that my research pool was pretty small. It was about 3 people that I interviewed throughout usability testing and iteration. So prior to generalizing these results, it's important to take note of that. And then finally, moving beyond the project, I would love to be able to build out additional pages, do more testing, make more iterations to just kind of improve that user flow, as well as get the input to fortify or input from Cherokee County stakeholders to get even better designs out of this redesign project. And then finally, I would love to be able to send this project to Cherokee County. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that definitely is a goal for me in the future as I do more iterations. And so we have made it to the end of this presentation. I really appreciate everyone who is listening, who spent their time to listen to me go through this website redesign for Cherokee County. If you have any questions in the future, you can definitely check out more projects that I have. Reach out to me on my portfolio website here. You can click on the link or you can use the QR code. This is my first website redesign, and so I've definitely learned more about how research and data and user insight definitely impacts the decisions I make from the design side and the UI portion of this project. So it's been really interesting to learn more about just the UX field in general and how accessibility and heuristic evaluations are super crucial in understanding product development at the very end. So with that being said, I appreciate the time taken to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out. But with that, thank you so much.